Hello everyone, this is Guillermo speaking, and today we are going to cover a video that was requested by one of my patrons, Macmillian, and it is about implementing Game Controller and ORK Framework 3 utilizing the integration that made Andy Miira from the Discord server. So let's start. We are going to be covering all the steps from scratch, so bear with me. The first thing we want to do is to go to the Unity Asset Store and search for Game Controller. And select the Game Controller from the Asset Store. Afterwards, scroll down and you will see there are some other links here. So of course I'm assuming that you already bought the product, and what we need to do here is go to the documentation page. So click on that link. I will open this in a new tab. Okay, and then I will go back to the Asset Store and search for ORK Framework. And of course we want to select ORK Framework 3. Buying ORK Framework is not required at this moment, but I encourage you to do it if you plan to make games with it. Anyways, what I want to do here as well is go to the tutorial section. So I will open this link in a new page. And once the tutorial page is open, I will select 3D Action RPG tutorial, click on that one, and then click on Start 3D Action RPG, and finally scroll all the way until you see the link to download the complete project. So this is a Unity 2020.3 project, but we are going to upgrade it to the latest 2021 LTS version. So click download complete tutorial and wait for it. Okay, so in the meantime the project is being downloaded. Let's go back to the Game Controller website, and here we want to select the FAQs, and after the FAQs we see that there is a GitHub repository to download some animations placeholder, as well as the actual integration from Andy Miira. So I would suggest this is optional but recommended if you want to have all the animation for the demos in the Game Kit controller. So go ahead and download the animations from Mixamo. I will click on the Mixamo placeholder animation here to go to the GitHub public repository. Okay, and from here, if we scroll down, we can see the ORK Integration 3.5 Unity package. So this is the one we want to download. Click on that one, and in here we want to download it, so we need to click on the download raw file. Okay, so I will create a new folder here, and let's say Game Kit Controller downloads. The animation pack is a fairly huge package, so it will take time. Once again, if we go to the Mixamo placeholder animations, can select download anyway. You can see the size of it. So actually I made a mistake here. This is the old one. So if we go to the public repository in the GitHub page, we can see animations package files. So this is the actual package we want, that is built for GameKey Controller 3.6. So download each of these files, and then you will need to use 7set or WinRAR to uncompress those. So beside the ORK integration and the animation pack, you could also download, which I did, is to download the easy slice system, but for the 3.6 Unity package, sorry, this one here, as well as the Spider controller if you want to have all the optional components for the demos in the GameKey controller kit. So after downloading all of this, I have unpackaged the animation. So I have this almost 1 GB file, and the integration pack and the slice system, as well as the 3D action RPG demo tutorial from ORK Framework. So let's start by creating the Unity project out of it. Let me get this browser out of the way. And what I will do is to rename the ORK Framework tutorial project to something like GKC ORK 3 and YT for YouTube. There we go. And what I will use is my path file to force the project to be upgraded to the latest 2021 LTS version without having to go into Unity package manager, so not package manager, the hub, Unity hub, and searching for the file. Also, this is the way I always like to start my projects. So I will paste my path file here, and I will edit, copy the path of the project. So the last version I have is 2021 3.30. So let's save the file and double click on it. We will get this prompt from Unity complaining about the version. So yes, let's click on continue. It will convert this project to the latest, or the version that we have selected in the project launcher bat file. I will pause the video meanwhile. Okay, so after a few minutes we have the project running. What I will do is to follow recommendation from the ORK Framework creator, so I will go to the data folder, but before that I always like to have an empty scene. So let's create here a new scene. Didn't want to do that. It's file, new scene, and let's select an empty scene and save it in the scenes folder, empty. If I can type, there we go. So the recommendation is to click on the underscore data folder and do an reimport, as well for the tutorial assets and in the underscore created. So let's do a reimport here as well. So if we were to launch ORK Framework, from the window menu, Game is Love, MakinORK. It's opening in my other screen. There we go. We have in the About full license for MakinORK and the limited license for ORK Framework. So I will click on Save. Nothing to save. This is good. So the system should be working right away. If I were to go to the scenes again and select the scene that came with the tutorial and click on play, we should have Ellen combatant player. There we go. Camera is working and the player is working as well, right? There we go. So click on Ctrl P to stop play mode, and let's start with Game Key Controller. So for that, in preparation, what I will do is to go to the package manager in the first place. Feel free to remove packages that you don't use. For example, I like always to remove version control because I'm not using Unity's version control. I will remove Visual Studio Code Editor. I will remove Rider Editor. I will keep only Visual Studio Editor. If you want to work with sprites, you will need the Unity 2D sprite component package. So I will do that because we might need it. And what I will also include here is the post-processing. So I will pause the video until I'm done. So at the end, this is what I have installed as a Unity packages. So I will now click on the packages and select my asset. So the first package I will import is the full version of ORK Framework. Again, this is optional, but I suggest doing it. So I click import. And of course we want to override the libraries. So click on import everything. And this is the step I like to have an empty scene, but I see I forgot to switch to my empty scene. So all the references to the new DLLs are kept properly, or at least this is the impression it gives me. Okay, so now that the package has been imported, let me switch to the empty scene. Click on Game is Love window, Game is Love MakinORK, or Ctrl Alt M for the shortcut. And we can see here in the editor MakinORK full version and ORK 3 full version. And let's click on save, and nothing has changed. And this is the version we are currently at, 3.15.2. So let's close the ORK Framework editor or MakinORK editor, and then let's search for Game Kit Controller. So Game Kit Controller is already here, so let's click on import. Game Kit Controller is a full package, so we will get this prompt. So click on import, and from here we can just select import everything, it doesn't matter. Okay, so after several minutes, that's it for the Game Kit Controller import. Now we can close the package manager, and let's import the animations and the other packages that we downloaded from the GitHub repository. Let me drag the window over here and I will select the slice system. And click on import. And now let's import ORK integration. And finally, let's import the animation pack. Because this is a huge file, drag and drop might not work, so I will just do the standard way, like import package, custom package. Then navigate to the folder path. I have this integration pack or animation pack, and then select it and click on open. Because this is huge, it will also take time, so I will pause the video. So when the package is uncompressed, now we want to select everything and click import. Alright, so the animation pack is installed, and we can see we have systems from GitHub for GameKit controller, Easy Slice, Limb Hacker, and Mixamo animations. Alright, so at this point, if you are smarter than me, you will create a copy of this project and use it as a start point later on to avoid having to go through this painful process of creating the project again from scratch. After that being said, what I will do is of course go again to my ORK Framework scene and make sure everything's still working here properly. And we see this problem, right? That Helen stopped working. And the reason for that is because GameKit controller also has a Helen avatar, but the animation, the import animation is set to humanoid instead of generic. So this is something we can easily fix. We can see here in the warnings. So some generic clips animate transform that are already bound by a humanoid avatar. So if you click on the Helen avatar, you will see it is pointing to the 3D GameKit asset from ORK Framework. Yet again, the asset itself is trying to use the avatar from the GameKit controller, or let's say the animations from the kit. So if we go to animations clip and select, for example, Ellen Idle, and again select Ellen avatar, is pointing to the same place. So let's click on update, and you can see here the animation is set to generic, not humanoid. So let me see if I get this right. Let's click on the Helen animator controller, and we see this in the tutorial asset from ORK Framework. And here, if we were to select, for example, in the movement, in the blend tree, Helen, now we see the problem. So the animation clip is pointing now to the 3D asset game kit, which is fine actually. It's in under the tutorial assets, animation type generic, and here the rig is humanoid. That's the problem. So this rig should be generic. So let's click apply, and of course stop play mode, and let's check it out again. Okay, so now everything is working again. And we can do the same for the game key controller, so let's open up one of the demos it comes with. Documentation, scenes. Let's try, for example, the mention that we used last time, mention demo. Where is the entrance? There we go. So if we were to hit play, we get this pop-up. So let's close it up and hit again play. And game key controller seems to be working fine as well. Right, we can sprint, run, switch weapons to. Okay, so let's hit Ctrl P to stop play mode and say whatever changes Unity think we did. And let's actually start now with the integration after several minutes. Okay, so what I will do is to go to the integrations in the game key controller folder, integrations, and we have this MakinORK folder. There is the documentation here that we are going to follow. I will open up this on my other screen, and the first thing we need to do is go to our project settings. So let's click on edit, project settings, and we need to add a couple of entries into the conditional symbols or define symbols. So scroll down. Where is it? Wow, we're in the editor, so we need to select the player settings. And well, I always like to change this to linear, but I will leave it like this. And let's scroll down. Here in the scripting define symbols, let's add one entry, and I will copy from the documentation the symbol we need to place here, and click another time and add the second symbol from the documentation without quotes, of course. Okay, so after doing that, I will click apply and Unity will compile again the libraries. So after that we get no errors, that's good. Another thing I will do now that we are here is to, because game key controller components are, how to explain it, well, they have a lot of components inside the prefabs and so on and so forth. Sometimes it can take too long to work with them if we have autosave prefab turned on. So I will go to the editor here and make sure that what is it, prefab mode, allow autosave is unchecked. This is really important to save time. Alright, so let's close the editor and let's continue now with creating our custom prefab. Alrighty, so let's start by creating a custom folder outside of the game key controller and ORK Framework as always. So let's create a new folder. I will call it _game, so it will be on top. and inside this folder I will create another folder, and let's rename it to prefabs. I know that I'm also going to be using another folder for the scenes, right? Okie dokie. So what we need to do is go to the game key controller and create a variant prefab of our current player here. So let's go to game key controller, then prefabs, and from here we need to select player controller. Not my bad. Let's do a search for player and game management. Player and game management, and right click on it and go to create, then prefab variant. We can leave the name as it is, but what I will do is to copy or move this variant into our prefabs folder that we have created previously, like so. Now if we ever change or update game key controller, it will not delete our custom prefabs. Let's open up the prefab in edit mode, and you can see there is a bunch of components, so right click any of these and select collapse all, but open again the transform component, and what we want is to select the player controller and make sure that the Z is set also to 0, because we don't want the ORK Framework player to be spawned with an offset. And select the player camera as well and 0 out the position. There we go. Save the prefab, and we can exit prefab editor mode. So the next step is to create a duplicate of this guy. So Ctrl D to do so. And press F2 to rename it, and I will rename this one player and game management no player, and press enter. Let's open up this new variant or duplicate into prefab edit mode and select the root of this game object, right click it, and in the prefab section select unpack completely. Okay, so now we want to select the player game object and drag it out to create a new prefab out of it into our prefabs folder. And let's rename this one to player 1 game kit controller, or GKC. GKC. After that, we can safely delete the player 1 game object from the hierarchy, and we need to select again the root of this game object. Let me add or expand the panel here, and we need to find the search on the player characters manager. We need to search for the search players at the start. So players character manager, expand that one, and if we scroll down, show hide player list, and we can see there is a player 1 here in the list, so we need to remove this entry. And also change change the current number of players to 0. And as an extra step, just click on clear list just to make sure that there is no players in the list. Then we can save our prefab and exit the prefab mode. There we go. So the next step is to open the player 1 game key controller prefab in prefab mode. And the idea is to have this one as a general dynamic spawning for players, and not only in the context of ORK Framework, of course. So once it's open, what we want to add is the player spawned component, or add player spawn component to the root of the game object. Select the root, add component, and let's search for add player spawn. There we go. Next step is in the player controller. We need to add the pause or resume player controller and camera system component. And the easiest way, according to the documentation, is go into the GameKit controller prefabs event system and copy the component from any of these prefabs. So let's do that. So GameKit controller prefabs event system, change player state trigger system, and select the pause resume player actions, and let's collapse everything perhaps, and this is the component we want. So click on it and let's do a copy component. Let's go back to our player 1 prefab, player controller. Let's again collapse everything and select the last one, right click and copy component, or sorry, paste component as new. There we go. So in this case, in this component, what we are going to change is the search player on scene if not assigned it. Let's check this to false or uncheck it. Then assign player manually to true. The current player is going to be our player controller, so let's select the game object out of the hierarchy and assign it to current player. And the player camera game object is going to be our player camera from the hierarchy here, this one. So let's drag it out. At this point we can save the prefab and exit prefab mode when it's done saving. Okay, so now let's go back again into our prefabs folder and let's create a variant of this GameKey controller prefab player that are going to be used for ORK Framework. So right click on it, create prefab variant, and let's rename this guy as soon as done. F2 to rename it, and player 1 GameKey controller underscore org. Now that we have our prefab ready, we need to start working with the MakinORK editor. So let's go there. Okay, so let's go to Window, Game is Love, MakinORK. And what I would like to do here is to, first of all, if you are using version control, click on Game Settings, and in the base settings, make sure that the data format is set to XML string. Save these changes. And hopefully this will not break anything else. The next step I will do is go to the editor tab, and in the backups I will set the backup to 0, so I don't want to save any backups, and save the changes in the editor as well. And now we can go to the base control, the game controls, and let's find the collision camera settings, and we can click here in the right panel, and in the collision camera settings let's enable collision camera, because we don't want ORK Framework to create an additional collision camera component in the GameKit controller camera. So let's do that. Let's save the changes. The next step, now that we are here in the collision camera settings, scroll down or until you see control behaviors, add a custom control, and the class name is going to be pause, player control and camera control behavior. This is coming from the integration from Andy Miira, and it's going to be blocked by the player. Down below, if we go to the ORK control settings, in the player controls, let's select this instead of button, let's select none. As well in the camera controls, let's select none, because GameKit controller is the one in charge of controlling the player at this point and the camera. And this behavior, what it's going to do is to, when we wanted to do something inside ORK Framework system and needed to pause or block the input of the player, to let the player to not move or the camera to not move, this is the responsibility of this component that we are adding here. Okay, so let me just make sure there is nothing to save. And now we can jump into the battle system. So let's go there, battles, battle system, and we need to make sure that our default battle system is using real time. So real-time battles is the easiest way to test the integration between these two products. Next, let's click on the UI tab and make sure that in the UI system we have selected Unity UI, because we already imported or created this project out of the tutorial 3D action tutorial project. We already have this already configured for us, otherwise it's a little bit of a pain having to do this from scratch, but we have plenty videos on how to do that and tutorials. So in this section, in the Unity UI settings, we have the event system. We don't want ORK Framework to create another event system for us, because we already have one in the GameKit controller, so let's select none for the event system. And if we check here now in the ORK Framework section, Start menu, there is a schematic that is going to run when the game starts using ORK Framework module. So let's just click on this one and delete it, so there is no start schematic for the time being. I will save the changes again in case something crashes. Now we can jump into the combatants section and select the combatants subsection, and here we have the list of the combatants that came with the tutorial demo. So we have Ellen, Chomper, Peter and Grenadier. So what we can do is either create a brand new combatant, but for simplicity's sake let's select Helen and then just copy Helen player, and in the content information let's click on edit text and change the name to GKC player and click OK. If we now select the base settings, at this point we see that the prefab that is going to be spawned as this combatant is the Alien variant, so we need to change that, as well as it's optional if you want this prefab to be renamed to the game object of this component, so it will be renamed to something like GKC player. That's something that we want to check or uncheck here. So let's remove the prefab and select our own prefab that we created before. There we go. Now we want this prefab to be created in the hierarchy of player 1, character, player, controller. So if we have this mentioned demo here open, if we open the player controller hierarchy, we can see that the actual player game object is supposed to be in this place. So that's the reason we need to change the child as root from none and select path and give it the path for this prefab to be spawned or created in this hierarchy, character, player, controller. Let's save the changes. So the last section we need to change here is in the animations and movement. So we can see that it's mapped to the Helen animation set. So let's remove this entry, click save again, and now we are going to go to the next step, which is setting up the ORK component into our player prefab. So let's close up this editor and let's continue. Alright, so let's select the player 1 prefab here, the ORK one, and go to click on open to open it in edit mode. Select the player controller game object, and let's add a combatant component. So we can either do from here, from the add component button, add combatant component, or we can open up in the window GameSlov MakinORK Scene Wizard and add component, add combatant component. Either way works. Scroll down to the component itself, and in the faction we want this to be, of course, in the player faction, and the combatant that this is going to be mapped to is the one we created, GameKey controller player. There we go. In this same player controller game object, we want to add the behavior we talked about before. So it is the pose, player controller, and camera behavior. And remember that this is the one we set up in the MakinORK editor. So it will, whenever ORK tries to block or unblocks the player control, for example when displaying a dialogue or doing something else, this script in turn will disable or unhide the GameKey controller UI, blocks the player movement and the camera movement. So at this point we can save our changes in the prefab and exit prefab mode whenever it ends. There we go. Next, let's select or create a scene to play with and test it out. What I will do is to go to the scenes folder in the main asset root, so we can open up the ORK Framework scene, and let's save this as. select our path, and let's change this to something like GKC ORK demo. And what we want to do here is to remove all the combatants. So I will select the last one until from the last one to this jumper, and click delete. We are going to follow the tutorial, the documentation, so I will also delete everything else here, or game starter. We can leave anything else, and in the main camera what I will do is to remove the audio listener because GameKey controller is going to add it. So remove this component, save the scene. So now that we have a, let's say, a blank scene to work with, please do not try to play it because you will get some error messages, since in the blocking architecture game object hierarchy there are some components expecting the ORK framework to be running already, and you will get some nasty errors there. So anyways, let's open up, in this case, let's open the MakinORK scene wizard, and from here we can click on add ORK game starter. And well, actually I don't want it to be inside this hierarchy because I already have it selected. So let me just drag this component out of it. And in the transform, I'm just going to reset the transform to zero out the position. Now we can see that this component, this ORK game starter, is going to start the game right away, but it's asking or it has this slot to start schematic asset. So the integration from Andy's, it already created a schematic for the starting point. So let me see here in the GameKey controller integrations, MakinORK schematic, we have this spawn player GameKey controller ORK. So let's drag it out and put it here in this start schematic asset. So as soon as the game starts, it will execute this schematic. So this is one way to do it. An alternative way of doing it is, if you remember, we went to the MakinORK editor, and in the UI start ORK Framework start menu, we remove the start schematic. So whenever ORK Framework starts on any level that we created or map, it will execute the schematic. So we can either set it here in the level itself, or framework wise to always execute this schematic if you have if we have another ORK game started in another level in this Unity project. It's up to you. I will leave it here for the time being. So now that we have assigned the schematic, let's open up the schematic to edit. So we can either double click on it and it will open again the MakinORK editor, and we have here the blank schematic. So we need to make sure that in the join group, this node is calling join the active player group, and the combatant that needs to join this active player group is going to be our GameKey controller player. After joining this group, we need to assign the ORK player to be this one as well. There we go. And finally, the last node is spawn ORK player at the spawn point. We don't have a spawn point yet, so let's create one now. So let's save our changes in the schematic. Close the editor. And here in the demo scene, let's select the place where to add our spawn point, right? So let me see. So let's select this place here, perhaps. So we can either go to Game is Love, MakinORK Scene Wizard, create game object, and let's select here a spawn point. There we have it. So if we focus select, we have our spawn point over here, and in this case we need to uncheck place on ground. We need game key controller to handle that for us. Save the scene, and now we also need to add to this scene our player and game management no player variant. So let's drag it out, and because we are using the real-time battle system from ORK Framework, we also need to add those that component into the scene that we deleted previously. So once again, let's go to Game is Love, MakinORK Scene Wizard, and let's create game object, real-time area. There we go. We can close this Scene Wizard window, and at this point, let's say the changes. If we hit play, we should have the ORK or the game key controller player spawn at this point via the schematic that we modified. So let's hit on play. And there we go. So this is the player spawn from ORK Framework, and everything seems to be working fine. We don't have the HUDs from the ORK Framework demo, so we have here the health component or health bar and some items over here. So let's disable those. Click Ctrl P to exit play mode, and let's go now to the MakinORK editor. In the UI section, let's select the HUDs, and we have here the player health, player stamina, items, so on and so forth. So let's select the player health, and let's uncheck auto display on each of these. I will leave the enemy health bar like so, and let's save the settings once again. Close the editor, and let's take it out. Take a look. So the ORK Framework HUD is gone. If you are not using the full version, you might see an ORK logo appearing randomly in the viewport. So if that's something nagging you, you can always buy the full version to get rid of it. So let me press Ctrl Alt P to enter pose mode in the game view, and let's select, for example, the head here of the player. But what I want to do is go to the player controller. We know that we added the add component, add combatant component, and after that we can see that ORK Framework is creating this combatant component for us. And from here we can see all the stats this player has: max HP, max stamina, and so on and so forth. as well from the stats from game key controller. So the next step before dealing with the stats bridge between game key controller and ORK Framework is to create a simple dialog with an NPC, a dialog that will be triggered by ORK Framework. Okay, so let's continue.